evening. My name is Taylor and I am the project assistant with Environment and Sustainability at the town of Okotoks. And tonight we are joined by Lori, who I'm very excited to hear about seeds starting from. And I think a lot of you are too. We've got some good numbers tonight. But before we kick it off, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy members Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda of Bearspaw, and the Dene of Tsuut'ina First Nations, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3, and all of those who make Treaty 7 lands their home. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use that Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get to them at some point during the presentation or at the end there. So I will now turn it over to Lori. Thank you again, Lori, for being here to talk to us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'll just share my screen here. And just gonna move this out of the way. All right, just move this off. So like I said, thank you for having me. I'm going to share some of my experience over, I guess, the past, how many years have I been doing this now? I think this will be my 23rd season of starting plants from seed. And so I've learned a lot over the years. I'll let you know that I started off by growing lots of flowers. When my husband and I moved out to our acreage in the Cold Lake area in 2000, we were planning for a wedding in 2001, and we wanted to grow all of our own plants. And we ended up growing everything for the garden and for our bouquets that year from seed. So I had really started to learn about growing annuals and perennials that first year of having my own greenhouse and garden. I'll let you know now my focus is mainly on veggies and herbs and that, so anything you can eat. Don't really do much of the flowers anymore. So what I'm going to talk about, this is just kind of the overview, and I'm going to actually turn off my camera if you don't mind. That might save some bandwidth. This is a pretty large presentation here, but just talk about seeds and some of the equipment and supplies that you need for starting plants by seed, some of the requirements from the starting medium and light, and then what to do once you have seedlings growing and how to nurture them and properly care for them and get them kind of in the condition that will be suitable for planting out, and then also some useful references and websites. Okay, come on. Where's my arrow button? Is not working. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay. So first of all, just the different types of seed out there. You'll often hear this in catalogs. You'll see this on Facebook groups. You'll hear this just in any sort of gardening forum that you're part of, all the different types of seeds that are out there. And so I just want to quickly explain what the different types are. If you hear open pollinated seed, that's really a variety that breeds true from seed. So you could save that seed, and whatever offspring that you have from that parent material will have the same characteristics as the parent plant. And it can be saved from generation to generation. When you hear about heirloom seed, that's open pollinated. They're grown for many years and passed down with a family, within a family or group. Hybrid, that's something doesn't breed true from seeds, so it's created through a deliberate cross between two genetically distinct parents. So you can't take that seed and start that seed as plants. Genetically modified, that's not a good term, and fortunately here in Canada you can't actually find any genetically modified seed for growing in home gardens and that. So you're not going to see any seed in any seed pack that you get here as GMO product. Organic is seed that's grown without the use of chemicals, and then untreated seed is seed that's not coated with fungicides or insecticides. So some seeds you'll see, if you open up a seed pack and see it's red or orange in color, that's usually just treated with something to prevent any fungi or insects from attacking that. Uh, in regards to sourcing seed, there's a lot of different places where you could get seed. You could go down to your local hardware store and pick up a whole variety at Home Depot or Home Hardware here in town. There's so many different places that you can order from. And I guess it's up to you as the grower, what kind of seed you're interested in and what sort of quality of seed you're looking for and what are some of the attributes that you want. So if you want some organic seed or heritage seed or locally sourced seed, that'll help drive where you get your seed from. There's totally nothing wrong with just going down to Home Depot or Home Hardware or any other garden center and picking up whatever seed packages are there. I do encourage you to think about sourcing locally because plants indistinguishable, like you had no idea really what they were. So you don't really want to do that. You want to support, I guess, companies local to your area. And by local, I mean like anything in the province or even in the same climatic zone that we're in. The other thing is there's often Seedy Saturdays, and I know with the pandemic, there hasn't been many of these in-person events, but I did see that Calgary is going ahead with their local Seedy Saturday event. I think it's March 19th. It's a Saturday. So if you're interested in that, that's a really great place to support local growers and just seed suppliers from some of those organic seed and heirloom seed varieties. One word of caution too is if you're going to a hardware store in town, just be mindful of the year on the package of the seed and even some of the greenhouses in town. And you could tell the year of the seed by going to the back of the packages, and you'll see an A for, I'm not sure what the A stands for, but there'll be a letter A and say a 0. And if you see that 0, then that seed was actually packaged in 2020, or you'll see an A and a 1, and that's 2021. So if you go down to your store or greenhouse, you want to make sure that it's purchased or packaged last year for this year. I know I've often seen seeds sit in these really hot greenhouses all summer long, and that hot, humid condition isn't really good for seed packages. So buy early on in the year and make sure it's new seed. There's nothing wrong at all with saving seed year after year. Just make sure you save and you store in a cool, dark place. Don't put them in the fridge. I know I keep my seeds all stored in shoe boxes in my basement in a cupboard, and they tend to do really well. I never have any issues trying to germinate them. When it comes to purchasing seed, these are some of my favorite go-to places. I love Veggies out of Prince Edward Island. And if I'm looking for some unique herbs to grow, Richter's is great, and so many different medicinal herbs that they provide. And I think one of my favorite places for veggie seeds now is called Harmonic Herbs. They're actually out of Barhead, just north of Edmonton there. And West Coast Seeds is always great as well for organic. And then if you're just looking for a tried and true, where you won't have any issues trying to germinate, Mackenzie Seeds is always good as well. Those are kind of my favorite go-to seed suppliers. Sorry, I had a slide in here. I was going to add a picture and I never ended up adding it, so you have a blank slide. But just in terms of my comment about storing seed, I end up storing all my seed in the shoe boxes in the basement, like I talked about. And I'm quite the seed hoarder, and every year I have to go through those shoe boxes and remind myself that I don't need to buy any seed this coming year because I have so much. And for the most part, I know most seed will end up germinating and be okay, and not have any issues with it. I have seed that's even 20 years old. Haven't yet tried to grow some of those, but yeah, like I said, as long as you store in a cool, dark, not very humid place, your seed should be fine year over year. Now, when it comes to starting seeds, you obviously have so many different seed sizes that make it easier or harder to grow, and often that's a deterrent. If you take a look at snapdragon seeds, they're just really impossible to deal with and to try to sow. They can be done, but when you look at some of the bigger stuff, like just even black-eyed Susan vines or pumpkins or many of the tomato seeds, those are much easier to handle. If you do have some questions about whether or not your seed is still viable, you can always do some germination testing on your own. And all you have to do is really soak some paper towels, moisten them, and lay the seeds down and kind of put them in between the paper towel layers. And over time, you'll see whether or not they germinate as well. So just the bottom, I just did this a few years ago with some pumpkin seeds I had saved from the garden, and just to see if they would actually germinate, and of course they did. Seed germination. So seeds themselves are held in a suspended animation, and so they often need the appropriate conditions or favorable conditions for them to germinate and grow. And so when you go to start seeds, you really need to understand how to break that dormancy period for the type of seed that you're wanting to germinate. And some of them are quite easy and some of them are a little bit more challenging. And so when you see this term external dormancy, so hard seed coats often prevent moisture from entering. And so there's different things that you need to do with seed that has a really hard seed coat, like scarification, where you take a piece of sandpaper and scrape it. Or there's internal dormancy, so that regulates the inner seed tissues. So different seed treatments are required for different types of plants. If you look at peas, beans, beets, asparagus, parsley, a lot of those, that seed coat needs to be softened, and you'll need to soak in water, not hot water, not cold water, just warm, lukewarm water for at least 24 hours. And that helps to start to soften that seed coat. And then you plant the seed. Others, like I said, where you have a really, really hard seed coat, that needs to be scarified so that water can start to penetrate that. And one of those that you need to actually use some sandpaper is if you're trying to grow any lupins from seed. I think the best thing to determine what sort of seed treatment is needed, most seed packages will tell you if you need to soak or if you need to scarify. And so just make sure you read the seed packages very carefully. There's also, when it comes to seed treatment and germination, there's a term called stratifying seeds. And so some seeds need to go through a cold, dark period before they can sprout. And what that means is you should actually put them into the refrigerator for a day or up to several months because they need that cold period. And some of those that require that sort of treatment are pansies, snapdragons, delphinium, and black-eyed Susans. Again, just follow the directions on your seed package. When it comes to supplies, this is just what I use. People will use many different things, but I find I have my little black planting tray. It helps to keep me contained. Otherwise, I used to do this in my laundry room, and I've been banned from my laundry room. And so I've been kind of kicked out to the garage, and I have a planting table and my big black plastic tray to keep the soil contained. And I have my little bowl with all my growing medium, spray bottle for wetting that soil, and labels and plant covers. When it comes time for containers, I know I often see people use the seed pucks and the peat pellets and I don't even know what they're called, but just the more organic growing pot. The tried and true way for me to grow my seeds is actually just reusing my plastic containers that I have. And I end up washing these thoroughly in hot soapy water before use. I do it actually at the end of the previous season, and I store everything in a box. It's all cleaned and ready to go in the spring when I want to start my plants. But you got to make sure whatever container you use, you have drainage holes in the bottom. Don't try to plant anything if you don't have drainage, because your plants are just going to rot. So make sure you have a drainage hole. I like these ones. I just end up reusing year over year. And yeah, I find they work well. This is the typical size of the cell packs that I use for starting in. And then after that, I continuously pot up, and I'll talk about potting up after. Starting medium, I think, is the most important thing if you're looking at starting seeds for the very first time. Make sure you get the right starting mix. Don't try to grow seeds in just regular dirt. That's going to cause nothing but problems for your seedlings. And you'll end up with damp off, which is like a fungal infection, and you'll end up losing your seedlings. You need that right mix. If you want to make your own, I suggest like a 1 part perlite to 1 part vermiculite to 2 parts peat moss. But I always end up using ProMix, and I use the BX that has the mycorrhizae. And where you source this, usually I get from Garden Retreat in Calgary. I find they're the best price point, I guess, for this. Typically, I think it's around $39 for a big bale. I did go just to, I think it's called Gorilla in Okotoks here. So they're, I hate to say this, but I think that's where you buy your supplies if you want to grow marijuana and that. But I ended up just picking up my ProMix there so I could avoid my trip into Calgary. And it was slightly more expensive, but I didn't have that drive into Garden Retreat. But this is the by far the thing that's going to give you the best success, is having that proper growing medium. When it comes time, again, make sure you understand what you're growing and what the light requirements are. So some plants require light, and if they do require light to grow or to germinate, you need to sow those on the surface of the growing medium. They can't be covered by any soil. So those really, really tiny snapdragon seeds and columbine, lobelia, salvia, petunia, those are really, really tiny. And if you end up covering them with dirt, they're not going to, or soil, they're not going to grow. So you have to sow those on the surface. Then there's others that require completely dark conditions. They can't have any light, and just covering them with the soil mix is not going to be enough. You also need to cover with newspaper. And so some of the other flowers here, calendula, delphinium, African daisies, pansies, violas, and lupins also require completely dark conditions. The other thing you'll often see is heating mats, and this just providing that bottom heat to seedlings is really important, and it really helps to speed up that germination process. So I invested in one of these mats. I apologize for my dog, Charlie. Don't know if he's outside. Yeah, they're great to have as well. I only have one, and I alternate using those on my different seed trays I have going. Light source. So you can have natural light or you can have artificial light. And both have their benefits. And yeah, I'm just going to walk through how I've grown plants. Again, apologize for my dog barking in the background. So I'm just going to walk through how I've grown plants over the years. So this was my acreage out in the Cold Lake area. We had a really beautiful south-facing sunny window. And so that first year I started plants back 22 years ago, I just had everything growing in my front window, and it was enough sunlight to get everything going. And one of the things is you'll always see your plants trying to lean towards the sunlight. I just constantly move those trays around and turn the plants so they have to constantly move back and forth. This was my house in Okotoks when I first moved here 15 years ago. And at that time I had a black lab, and you could see where she follows the sun around. And so it was a really sunny south-facing window too. And it was really good at being able to grow plants from seed using just natural light in my front windows. Unfortunately, in 2014, we replaced all of our windows, and they became more energy efficient, and so that sunlight wasn't as intense coming through our house. So I kind of didn't have much luck growing just with natural light in my front window anymore. This is just what my front window used to look like way back when, growing there. And so now, over the last 5 years, I've invested in a grow light that I have in my basement. And I got, sorry, I'm just going to put you guys on mute for a minute here. Sorry. So yeah, this is my basement now. I have the grow light in it. I never try to start my seedlings in the basement. They're just too cold to get anything growing. So I have my dining room table with the heating mat, and I have towels laid out on my dining room table. And I just try to get the seeds germinated upstairs where it's a little bit warmer before I start bringing the plants into the basement where the grow lights are. So this is my dining room table set up, usually what it looks like. And always remember to label what you grow, because I always have the problem. I start so many plants sometimes in different varieties of tomatoes, and my little sticky notes always end up falling off. And so sometimes I don't know for quite a while which variety of tomato I have growing. When it comes to watering seeds, it's really important to keep the growing medium moist for those seeds to germinate. You don't want things to dry out, but you also don't want that soil mix to become waterlogged. So as the seedlings or the seeds are trying to germinate, and when the seedlings are really small, I cover those plastic trays with the plastic trays here, and always bottom water when they're small, because you don't want to flood them. Those stems are really sensitive. So just put water at the bottom, and the soil just wicks up the moisture. So nurturing seedlings, really important that once your seeds germinate and you have seedlings growing, you really need to provide them with air circulation. That's the way they're going to become really strong plants. So expose them to a light breeze every day. And when they're in your house, just turn on a fan and have that fan going on them. You'll see them blowing and you think that's harmful to them, but it's not. It really helps to build strong plant tissue and thicken those stems. Thinning out. So when you're dealing with really, really tiny seeds like those portulaca and snapdragon seeds, you're going to end up with a whole whack of plants. And it's really important that you thin them out. Oftentimes, if I'm growing tomatoes, I'll even see two tomato plants growing together. And I have this guilty feeling that I can't actually rip one of those out. I can't kill them, but you want to, because they take away nutrients from each other. So it's really important, just like your carrots, if you're growing in a garden, you need to thin out your carrot seeds or your carrot plants. Fertilization, I know a lot of people might not support this, and if you're organic, you might not want to put any fertilizer on your plants. I'll let you know, I don't use fertilizer in my garden. I never fertilize my garden, but I do fertilize my seedlings, especially while they're young, until actually they get planted out in the garden. I try to fertilize regularly. And one of the things that you fertilize with is this plant starter, and you want something that's really high in the phosphorus. So a 10-52-10 fertilizer is best, and that really helps to promote good root development. You don't want to use something with a lot of nitrogen. So anything that has like the 20-20-20, that's good at really making things flower and bloom and making sure that you have like a lot of green tissue and green leaves. But what you do, if you do that, if you just fertilize with 20-20-20, is you end up with really poor root development and a lot of greenery on top. And so those plants aren't really healthy. So you want to promote that root development. Next to the growing medium, I'd say the most important step, and air circulation, is potting up. And when I say potting up, your seedlings very quickly run out of room in their pots. And as soon as you pot up, it just has more opportunity for them to grow into the next size of container. So you want to be very careful when you're potting up. You don't want to handle the plants by their stem. So just be very careful and kind of grab by the leaves and very carefully transplant into a bigger pot. And you can plant all the way up to the seed leaves there. The deeper the pot, the better. So often I'll see plants at plant chairs or even in any box store where you buy plants. And I'm just always shocked at how shallow the pots are that plants are being planted into. And when you pick them up, they have really no root growth. And so by planting in deeper pots, you have that opportunity for those roots to really grow deeper. And one of the best things that I find for growing plants and trying to get that deep root growth is just use the red plastic cups there. Drill some holes into the bottom, and they're nice and deep. Greenhouses. So there's lots of different greenhouses that you can start to move your plants out to once they've started to grow and temperatures start to warm up. Just be very careful. I know when I first moved to Okotoks, I had a greenhouse or cold frame, I guess, just like the one on the right here. And we moved in April. And that day we moved, I had started all my plants when I lived in Cold Lake, and I carried them kind of on my lap. Didn't have very many, but I still had some. And I carried them on my lap and moved to Okotoks. And I think that weekend we had beautiful weather during the day. I think it was like plus 25 on an April day. And then very quickly, like we all know who live here, how quickly our weather changes. And that night, I ended up losing everything. And thinking that things were safe in this plastic greenhouse in Okotoks when I went to bed at whatever temperature it was, and they weren't. So just be mindful of that. So you have all those different types of cold frames you could use. This was my first greenhouse at that acreage I lived on in Cold Lake, and it was just a glassed window area attached to our garage that we had. This was the green plastic frame that we had when we first moved to town here. And then I'm just showing you this picture of this really ugly shed, but that ugly shed in our yard has now become my greenhouse. And so my husband, many years ago now, actually retrofitted that roof and put in some greenhouse roof panels, air circulation here as well. We got some vents on both sides. And this is where I move my plants out to, usually in April around my birthday. Really important to harden off your plants. So young plants that are raised in protected conditions. So if you're keeping them in your house, in your kitchen, in your living room, in the grow lights in your basement, they're not very hardy. They have very soft, tender tissues. And so they have to be acclimatized very gradually to the outdoor weather. And so when you do move them outside, move them into a shady spot and then gradually expose them to more sun. I know when I first started out, we had a beautiful day, and I took out the plants from my house and then put them outside, and they all burned. The sun was just too intense for them. So start off with a shady spot just so they get used to being outside. If you have a greenhouse or just a plastic frame, you might end up having to move stuff in and out. So this was my kitchen years ago, where every day they would be outside and every night I bring them back in. So it's a lot of work, but when you're an office worker and you don't put on many steps, you really appreciate the steps you can do at night when you're moving plants in and out of the house. This is also just getting your plants ready to being outdoors. So I have plants growing in my greenhouse here, but also sometimes they get just too hot in the greenhouse during the day. And I want to get them exposed to those spring winds that we have. And so I'll move the pots and plants outside so they spend some time getting used to being in the outdoors. And then, of course, we have our crazy weather that we get in Okotoks here. And so even if you do have a greenhouse, you're still going to have to deal with some of the cold temperatures that we get in April and even May and sometimes even June around here. So it's quite funny. We have this orange tarp that we put on that greenhouse just to try to keep the heat in. And just some pictures of some other plants that we have growing. So usually for me, you'll see my glass of wine here. Usually my birthday, which is on April 20th, that's usually around the time period that I start to move all my plants outside. And it's been my birthday tradition that I'll have my glass of wine with my plants outside in the greenhouse. Ventilation is critical. So if you do have a greenhouse or a shed like mine that you've converted into a greenhouse, you really want to have that air circulation. And so we have these ventilated panels in the greenhouse where they just open automatically. And so you get the hot air releasing. And then of course I have my fan as well that I end up putting there, and it helps to bring in air and also just to provide that wind or air circulation on the plants as well. And then heating. I invested a number of years ago just in a little greenhouse heater. So instead of doing that back and forth with the plants that I used to do and bringing them into the kitchen, once they're in the greenhouse, they're kind of there. And those really cold nights, I do tarp that greenhouse just to keep in that additional heat. And then if we have a really cold night coming, if it's getting below zero, I'll definitely bring in some of my less hardy plants like the basil and that. Those always come in because they just don't handle the cold at all. In terms of transplanting, usually wait until that last spring frost, and then your plants by that time hopefully will have been acclimatized to being outdoors in your greenhouse, or just even if you're just moving them out during the day. But just in terms of transplanting, you really want to plan to plant on a day when it's not super hot and not super sunny. So the earlier in the day that you could do it, or the later in the day you can do it, is better. And then choosing an overcast day to do the planting as well. And then one of the things that I've learned over the years, and hasn't really come true the last couple, I think we've been pretty fortunate not having any June frost, but one of the things I learned early on is don't plant anything out before the first full moon in June, especially your really sensitive plants like the basil and that, or cucumbers. And so that's usually my rule of thumb, unless that full moon happens later in June. This is just an example of some of the annuals that I've grown. So annuals are really super easy, generally to start from seed. Some of them are quite small, so a little bit trickier to handle, but for the most part, annuals are really easy. Some pictures of the flowers I used to grow. Like I said, I don't really grow flowers anymore. It's all food now. And then just some of the perennials as well. So these are just some of the ones that I've had luck growing. And then, of course, all the different fruits and vegetables you can grow from seed. When it comes time for vegetables, I usually try to, definitely your peppers and your tomatoes, those are something you're going to want to start early. But I even start my broccoli and cabbage early as well, and kale. Those, I think, at least 6 weeks before you want to plant out, you want to have some of those growing. And then, of course, the herbs, some of them you want to start really early in January. I've kind of given that up. I know I was talking with Ginny and Taylor beforehand, and I actually haven't started any plants this year yet. And that's the same as every year. Usually I don't start growing anything until around March 5th to March 9th. I find that if you start anything sooner, you're just going to run into a problem of having too big of plants that are just, they're wanting to be and ready to be planted out, and the conditions just don't allow it. So I just kind of push everything until at least that first week of March. The exception would be is if you wanted to grow some herbs, so like rosemary and lavender, and that's something you're going to want to start earlier in January. So just some little seedling pictures. The other thing you can start too is bulbs indoors. So I used to order from Veggies in Prince Edward Island. They're just bulbs, and then I get that head start as well on growing some of those. Really important that you keep track of what you grow. And the one thing I love, and I've had this ever since I started gardening 20 plus years ago, is a gardener's journal. And every page or every day has a 10-year time frame, so you can see what you did and keep track of what you planted over the years. And so that's where I kind of know March 5th is my date. That's the date that I normally go with planting. Some useful references. I know these are older references now, but they are definitely my favorite. All the Lois Hole books that are available out there. And some great tips, especially in the perennial one and the annual one, of how to start some of those plants from seed. Since then, I've come to really enjoy reading the Seed Sowing and Saving books, and then the Plant Propagator's Bible too are also some of my go-to. And then if you're wanting other references in that, lots of useful information and really great information on the Seeds of Diversity website. So there's so much you can do, and yeah, it's really great to be able to grow your own food, especially from plants that you've grown from seed by yourself. So just a really fulfilling, I guess it's a great feeling that you can do that. And we all have that ability. Sometimes it just takes a lot of patience to do. So that's it. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll turn on my camera for questions in that.
We do have quite a few questions for you, which I'm excited about. So I'll just start at the top here. So someone they bought the Mackenzie seeds from Home Depot, but the marking that was on there said R2. Is that different than you were saying, like A and then a number?
So yeah, I don't know what the difference in letters are, but so that 2, so I imagine they just bought those recently, so maybe that is for planting out in 2022. I don't know what the difference is in A versus R.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I thought the 2 would be 2022. Okay, we have a question about the difference between the Pro Mix BX versus HP.
That's a good question. I don't know. You know, I noticed that for the first time. Well, not the first time. I'm sure I noticed it every year. But when I went to buy my growing mix last week from the Gorilla store in Okotoks, I did notice the HP. And I was going to ask, I think it's something related to the moisture piece. I'm not sure exactly what. But I know I always end up using the BX because I think that has the mycorrhizae, which is really helpful for growing the plants.
Good to know. And a question about what grow lights you have.
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure if the question is in regards to the bulbs or in regards to the system. So I ended up buying mine secondhand. I think it was a Lee Valley one that's probably 20 years old, but I ended up buying from a former garden club member of mine. And yeah, and then you could just go to Home Depot and you could buy the growing bulbs to go into those.
Okay. And again, regarding grow lights, can you use plain fluorescent lights or do you have to buy special grow lights?
I'd recommend getting the special grow lights. Yeah, there's a different, I don't know what you call it, if it's not a frequency, but they do have a special.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are special ones. Good to know. Okay, let me just read through this question. There's lots of typing. Do we need to cover the soil? I have Jiffy pellet, watered it to expand and put it inside the Ziploc. Is this correct? Also putting seeds in tissue and spray with water and lock it in Ziploc. Is this a good way to germinate seeds?
So I think I mentioned the Jiffy thing. I don't really care for those. I find they dry out quite a bit. And honestly, I think I tried one year and I didn't have a lot of success. So I don't use those at all. But I think maybe somebody else on here can speak up. I don't know if they have the ability to talk, but yeah, I think you'd still want to be able to cover that seed, even if you're planting it in those Jiffy pots. And then, yes, I don't know about using tissue. I think you could probably grow within paper towels. I don't know if the tissue would be too soft and stick to the seed. That might be a problem as well.
Okay. And yeah, if you do have any response, anyone that's listening, you can type it in the chat. There isn't a way to unmute yourself in the webinar, but type it in the chat. We'd all love to learn from everyone here. And the next question, what flowers, veggies, herbs, seeds can we start now? So I think we might have covered that at some point, but maybe you have something
Yeah.
further to say on that.
So like I said, usually I start mine in March. And so what I really focus on now for myself is I love to grow tomatoes, all sorts of varieties, peppers, and then like the kale and the cabbage and the broccoli and everything. But I think all your tomato plants, now is a perfect time to start tomatoes. And you know what, if you've never grown seeds, grown plants from seed before, tomatoes are a great thing to start with, right? Peppers, you can. I always have good success starting now, but sometimes I wish I would have started like a few weeks earlier. If you're into herbs and that, like doing oregano right now and thyme and basil, this is a good time of year for that as well. Flower-wise, some of the perennials you might want to start earlier, like earlier February versus leaving to now, but now is a good time for many of the annuals as well.
Great. Okay, we have a question. Can you use plant prod on bulbs? Maybe for those of us who don't know what plant prod is.
Sorry.
I'm assuming it's it's called plant prod. I'm assuming it's a product, but I'm not familiar with it, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure what plant prod is. I haven't heard before.
We will go to the next one then.
Maybe.
If someone wants to specify what that is, will be happy to look at that further. Can you just start seeds in bigger, deeper pots to start? Okay, rather than upsizing the pots.
Right, and so it does, upsizing or planting up does seem like a lot of work. But I think the most important thing when you're planting up, you're planting that plant deeper. So you're going to plant right up to the leaves. And so I guess one of the downsides of sowing directly into a bigger pot is you might not have 100% success. You're kind of wasting all that soil, not necessarily wasting, you could use it again, but you're wasting that soil and that space for growing something that may or may not germinate. And then also your plant is just going to grow really spindly because it's going to continue to grow up and you're not planting it deeper. So when you pot up, you're planting the stem deeper and kind of burying the stem up until the leaves. And that what that does is it grows a stronger plant. And so that plant will continue to grow from there. I think you'll just end up with really long, spindly plants if you just try to plant in a deeper pot to begin with.
Okay, good to know. Okay, we have someone interested in planting potatoes in buckets. What's the protocol for potatoes?
Oh, okay. So I don't know if you recall the one picture I had of my greenhouse that had the roof. I was kind of showing how it ventilated. I had a whole bunch of black pots outside. And so during the first year of the pandemic, I was just trying to grow as many potatoes as I could in my in my backyard. So my husband's a landscaper and I get lots of big pots from him. So I ended up using those black pots that were against the greenhouse to grow potatoes in. And so you just want to kind of put a little bit of soil in your pot, plant your potato tuber there, and then as the plant grows, you fill it up with more and more soil. So that's generally what you do. Okay. Now, I know I didn't have a lot of great luck doing that. So
interesting. Are there some plants that don't like to be transplanted that you know of?
Trying to think, there's some that'll specify. I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since I've grown some of the perennials, and I think there are a few that are very finicky. I think lupins might be one of them, and you got to just be very gentle and careful. I don't have any issues transplanting any of the vegetables or herbs or tomatoes or peppers or anything like that I currently grow. But you'll see that on the package if a plant is less hardy when it comes to transplanting. So just be extra careful.
Sounds good. I have a question. Can you speak to pinching off?
Oh, that's a
So,
great question. And I heard that because that is important. So you want to have low bushy plants. And maybe I'm just going to open up my screen here again and share a photo. This is really important for like a lot of the herbs you're growing and some of the flowers as well, is you want to have plants that are low and bushy. So when it comes to oregano and lemon balm and stuff like that, I'm always kind of using my herbs as they're growing so that I'm pinching off and allowing things to get bushier. I don't really do that with my tomatoes when they're growing as seedlings, and you really want to be careful that you're not pruning the type that don't need pruning. So there's the determinate variety of tomatoes and indeterminate variety, and the determinate have a set height that they're going to grow to, and you don't want to be pinching those and plucking those. But I think when you start to notice some plants, like your herbs and that and your flowers, pinch them, and even when it comes just to herbs, like use them as they're growing in your greenhouse, and that'll help them become bushier in that.
okay. Interesting.
I'm just going to show my picture of the pots here. That was our setup for potatoes in pots.
All right.
House in there.
Okay. We have a question. What is the ultimate depth of a raised garden?
Good question. Yeah, I don't. I'll show you again, I'll just share my garden. So I do have raised beds in my garden here. You don't want too deep, because I find too deep, it dries out and it requires a lot of moisture. I think these are about 1 foot in depth.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think if you have, I think the more like too deep, like I said, you're going to require a lot of moisture to keep moist, and they'll dry out a lot. So I don't think you need a lot of depth, especially depending on what type of plants. Like there's some plants that are going to be deeper rooted, but for general vegetable gardening, you don't need too much depth.
Awesome. Well, we have a question about the resources you shared on the last slide. I think someone might have just missed it. If you maybe want to shuffle to that slide.
Seeds of diversity, I think.
Perfect. Great. So I'll let everyone look at that. And there is going to be a recording available for everyone that couldn't write fast enough. We'll let you rewatch it if needed for those taking notes. So I have a question here. Is Promix BX only for sprouting seeds, or can it be used for the ground outside as well?
So it's really expensive. It is a great growing medium, but you'll never be able to afford to fill with it. So I know, so every year when I grow my seedlings, I get usually 2 to 3 bales. Usually 2 bales is what covers it. And I find all my seedlings in all the stages of potting up, well, before they get planted in the ground, I love just putting them in this type of soil mixture. Just it helps to keep the right balance of moisture and everything. But I would never think of putting this into my raised beds or even to my pots. It's too expensive.
Okay. Okay. I know we talked about seeds that germinate in the dark that you would cover. We're asking for examples of veggies you would germinate in the dark. If you have any on the top of your head.
I don't think any of them require like the newspaper covering. So I think these ones in particular, the ones that required the dark treatment, they were really, they're tiny and you need to make sure that they're completely in the dark because any light will prevent them from germinating. But I think the vegetable seeds are quite big. You plant usually 1/4 inch deep or 1/2 inch deep, and that's enough of a soil layer to cover it to help with germinating. So usually you don't have a problem trying to germinate vegetable seeds.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we have someone that's new to Okotoks, coming from Ontario, and they're asking the first frost date in the fall and the last frost date.
So
Good question.
good. That's a really great question. So I grew up in Edmonton and I lived in Cold Lake, which is in northeastern Alberta. And I'll just say that it is so much easier to garden in northern Alberta than it is to garden here in Okotoks. So I think this is probably one of the most challenging places, I would say, to garden in this province, if not in this country. And so, yeah, I see June 10th here. That's perfect, Colin Russell. So June 10th to August 30th, average frost-free days. And yeah, it's really frustrating because usually by the end of May, we're all itching, or even by the May long weekend, we're all itching to get our plants in the garden, and it never fails. There's always a frost after the May long weekend, and there's always a frost, except I think the last couple of years, in the first week to 10 days of June. And yeah, just really unpredictable here. So like I said, I just be mindful, pay attention to the weather. If you're going to have a rainstorm in June, I would just wait till after that rainstorm, because usually once it clears off, we always have a frost after that. And in the fall there, yeah, be prepared to lose your stuff or to have a frost, usually definitely by the September long weekend.
Perfect. Yes, it can be tricky in regards to frost dates. We have a question about if there is a desirable temperature to start seeds and keep seedlings if you're not using a heat mat.
Yeah, I know, like in the past I've used, I think you want to keep them as warm as possible. And I know our house is pretty cool. We keep our temperature quite cool. Back when I first started, I used to keep my plants on top of the refrigerator, the seedling trays, because usually that was enough heat to provide enough bottom heat. So I think the warmer, the better. If you're going to keep your house cool, just be mindful of that. Again, I've never really had a problem trying to germinate anything in my cooler house, even before I got the seed mat. But yeah, typically I'd say at least 20 degrees, but that's only, you don't need that constantly, right?
Mm-hmm. Perfect. My goodness, the question just keep rolling in. Back to potatoes. Is there a variety of potatoes that are better for pots? You know of?
All that maybe Colin knows. I don't know, Colin, if you've done that. Like I said, I tried it the 1 year, didn't have a lot of success, but I was just using, no, he says he doesn't, no. Yeah, I was just using leftover potatoes that I had from planting in a garden, an acreage garden I shared with a friend at the time.
Okay. Do you have any tips for moving plants from Aerogarden to dirt, I'm assuming outside?
So the Aerogarden, is that just one of those tabletop greenhouse things? Is that what that
I'm
is?
assuming so. It just
Yeah.
said Aerogarden. If we want to get a specification there.
Yeah,
I'll wait for
I've
that.
never used an Aerogarden, but still I think those are quite short. The same sort of transplanting rules, like just make sure you acclimatize your plants to get them used to being outdoors. So whether or not you pot up and put them in bigger pots before you kind of move them, get them used to just being out in the wind and the sun gradually.
Okay. Yeah, and it was what you mentioned. I got that in the chat here. I see a question. Is there a local gardening club in Okotoks? And I think if someone, there is. If
There is,
we
and
have,
so
I think we have them here tonight. So if they want to add some information in the chat, I think that would be great for our garden audience here.
yeah, so Susan Russell is our
Yeah.
Okotoks Garden Club president, and Colin Russell is here as well. So they can get you connected. I think, Susan, is it still okotoksgardening@gmail.com for the email address?
Yeah,
Again,
let them throw it in the chat. Yeah, I do know they're here, so.
And then the other thing too, I'm not sure if folks are aware, but we do have a Okotoks Garden Club Facebook group page, and it's an expansion of our garden club, and just a lot of useful information and chats that happen on that as well. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to join that group. And I'll just put the Okotoks, I'll put the email here for Okotoks Gardening. And then just
that is the right email. Perfect. And I just see a chat that I can, or a question that I can answer. Are you allowed to keep bees in Okotoks? You cannot keep honeybees in Okotoks. Keep having a bee house that can be inhabited by native bees is perfectly fine. And I actually encourage you to check out our website. We have lots of bee information on there if you're curious about that, and talks we've had about bees. And okay, another question for you, Lori. Do you have experience using cocoa coir rather than peat moss? It's apparently much more sustainable or environmentally friendly.
So I haven't used that, and I know that's a thing that's becoming more sustainable. No, I haven't. I'm kind of stuck in my way of just reusing my old plastic pots in my growing medium, and then just putting out into my vegetable garden.
That's fair enough. If it works, why change it, right? Okay. We have someone curious about growing kale. Wondering if the summer in Okotoks is not hot enough for growing kale.
We could easily grow kale here. I used to start all my kale from seed and that, but I've volunteered with the Okotoks Food Bank Garden, and we just plant the seed directly in the garden. And there's no issue growing kale here in Okotoks.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Good to know. I've never tried it either. I've looked into it, but I've never had it. So
I'll have to try that for my community garden plot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, talking about soil and growing mediums, we have a question about, oh, it just scrolled away. There we go. What type of soil you use for your raised beds? If you buy it in bulk, where you get it, what it is, yeah.
Yeah, so I forget where my husband got it, but we do buy in bulk, just regular black dirt, and I amended just with peat moss, but I'll have to try what Ginny was referring to there. I'm not sure. I really can't remember. So we did the big garden renovations with those raised beds a couple years ago. Before that, we had a round vegetable garden in our yard for over 10 years. And that round garden was because we used to have a trampoline in our backyard. And when the kids started hurting themselves, the trampoline went. And We turned the trampoline pad into a round vegetable garden. So a lot of the soil that we used for filling our raised beds just came from our original garden. But maybe there's others that have their favorite go-to soil supplier here.
Great. Yeah, and if you do have suggestions, add them in the chat. Everyone will benefit from all the suggestions. I have a question here. Can you explain true leaves?
Yeah, so when the seed first germinates, there'll be two leaves that kind of come out. And so they're not necessarily true leaves yet. So it's usually the next set of leaves that come out are the true leaves for the plant.
Okay. This question here. So we have someone that has a acreage outside of Okotoks. There is no existing garden. They have a full sun area and lots of room. Would you suggest that they need raised beds, or can we make rows in the ground? Suggestions for soil to use as it is currently pasture. Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't recommend raised beds for acreages. Like I said, I shared a garden with my friend who lives on a acreage just outside of Okotoks for many years, and we had the garden in the ground. And if you look at I don't know if you've ever visited the community garden in Okotoks, but we have a really large garden for the food bank, and that's in the ground as well. And so in the ground gardens are better at holding moisture. I think the one problem with in the ground gardens, I guess you might experience when you're out in an acreage, is the invasion by quackgrass and other weeds. So if you have a raised bed or even just a border around it to help prevent the weeds from coming in, that might help, but you don't necessarily need to. And then our soil's really poor around here. You could like rototill the ground, but you're still going to want to bring in other black dirt and other amendments like peat. And I don't even recommend manure because manure has a lot of weed seeds in there, but if you could get some mushroom manure or something like that, or sheep manure in that, just to amend the soils.
Okay, interesting. This question, interesting. Do you find success when planting the same seeds over a few weeks? I'm assuming they're meaning like planting the same varieties at different times. I
don't know if that's in relation to outdoor planting in a garden or just sowing indoors. I know I don't, just because it's so much to do, and I just kind of space it out. So when I'm growing my plants indoors, I don't do everything at once. I spread stuff out over a number of weeks, and I'll start with one or two varieties of tomatoes or whatever, and then the next week I'll do something else. And usually that's for me, just to help keep track of what I'm sowing, because if I sowed everything at once and my little sticky notes come off my tab, I completely forget what I have growing. So at least I know that, hey, these should be bigger because I sowed them earlier. So I do that just just to spread out that sowing season. And then I guess when you're planting in a garden as well, if you plant everything at once, everything's going to mature at once. So you can always leave room for planting at a later time period. So in a couple of weeks so that you have stuff maturing at different times. That's always good to do.
Perfect. Okay, we have a few more questions here. We have a question about tomatoes. So we started the tomatoes inside last year and they didn't really turn out. So they only potted up once. Is that why, or is it lack of nutrients?
I don't think it's a lack of nutrients. So I think the seedlings will still, provided you have the right soil, right? I think the potting up is probably the most important, and then also the light too. So sometimes we just don't have enough natural light in the house. And even my bright south-facing windows, they were always great kind of end of January, February. But by March, like the sun was just so high and not much light went inside the house. And so you just need to make sure you get them outside, exposed to the elements, and then that potting up is critical. So just plant them in deeper pots so that they don't become really spindly.
Perfect. Okay. We have a question about if deer is a problem, maybe in your yard, in a fenced backyard. I know in town there are deer, so if you have any tips on keeping deer out or
I know
that.
Susan and Colin probably have a lot of tips, and I know the garden lots of talks on this over the years. So I'm really fortunate. I have a wooden fence in my backyard, and this isn't my backyard behind me. This is my grandma's backyard in Edmonton. But the deer cannot get into my garden in my backyard. And I have a community garden plot that's fenced, so they can't get into that. What I do grow in my front yard is a lot of perennials that the deer don't like. And so I've got a lot of hardy perennials. I do have some oak barrels by my garage. That's where I end up growing all my cucumbers and tomatoes. Actually, not tomatoes in recent years. So it's usually my cucumber growing area. And the deer don't seem to touch my cucumbers either. So I guess I'm fortunate. There's a few times, I guess, over the years where they've ate tomato plants or cucumber plants when it's really dry out. But just be mindful of what you're planting where. And I know it's really hard for people that have backyards with chain link fences, and the deer can easily jump over. Ginny, I don't know if the town still is allowing those people to add like extra barriers to their chain link fence so that deer aren't coming in.
Okay, and this question is about when to transplant seeds germinated using the paper towel. As long as it's germinated, or?
Yeah, I would transplant as soon as you've got the kind of the cotyledon or as soon as you've seen that germination. I try to get them in soil. They need nutrients.
Perfect. Oh, okay, that's all the questions I had. I did send you a little message. Oh, there's one more popping in. We have time, so I'll get in there. What fruit trees can you recommend? We're a little, I don't know if you're planting from seed or fruit tree, but I'm sure you still have suggestions with that.
Maybe, I don't know if Colin has any. Colin or Susan might have more. I'm trying to think, we don't really have any fruit. We have a Nanking cherry in our yard. I think that's about it in our yard. We have other trees, but not fruit trees.
Okay, yes, Colin says apple, pear, sour cherry. Those are some pretty popular ones. Perfect.
And thanks to whoever posted about the mushroom manure. So it's nice to see that that's free. So
yeah, I saw a lot of great suggestions on soil and everything, which is perfect. So just make sure, if you have any more questions, add them in there. If not, I'll give a quick second.
And if you have any, like I said, if you're not a member of the Okotoks Garden Club Facebook group page, look it up if you're on Facebook, and feel free to ask questions on there. There's lots of people with a wealth of knowledge.
Perfect. Okay, yes, I'm not seeing any other questions in. Lori, would I be okay to share your information if we do get questions for you?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I can do that. And like I said, we will hopefully have a recording available soon. So if you need to do a little rewatch to get the information again, that will be available. But I'd like to thank you again for a great presentation. We had lots of interest in this one, so it was perfect. Lots of great stuff in that. If we don't have any last questions, again, thank you so much. We do host green living workshops every month, so keep an eye out on the okotoks.ca events page for our next workshop. We are. Yes, we do have calling coming in next time, so it will be a great one. I'm really looking forward to that. We kind of prefaced it with the seed starting, and then we're going really into veggies next month, which is awesome. Oh, I'm having exactly. Oh, I'm seeing questions in the chat about this mushroom compost.
Is it the Mushroom Factory? I think it's called. So it's north of
Yes.
Airdrie.
Yeah, Mushroom Factory north of Airdrie. That's what I'm seeing in the chat here. So yes, that's an interesting one to look into. I think that's the question I got. Perfect. Alrighty, well, I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll see you next month for veggie gardening.
Take care.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.